So February has finally come to a close, and that means let's do another one of these film diary videos where I go over every film that I've watched over the last month. Unlike January, which was incredibly busy for me when it came to watching films, I actually didn't watch a lot this month. You may have also noticed that I've not really posted much over this month, and that's partly because I've been working on the Hella Mega videos. I've also been working on the MCU videos, been working on a couple of future things that may come out over the next couple months, hopefully. And I was also working on my Crimbo channel, posting quite regularly on there until I've taken a couple of weeks break. So although I've not really put much out and not really watched a lot this month, I have actually kept fairly busy doing stuff. So yeah, this has been a surprisingly quick month for me compared to January, which just went on forever. But I still did watch a movie most days this month, so let's just go over everything I watched from beginning to end. On February 1st, I rewatched Blue Velvet, directed by David Lynch. This is one of my favourite David Lynch movies. I love the way he displays suburbia in this really sordid and sexual way. It's definitely David Lynch at his purest and kind of most accessible. Although it's very strange and quite surreal at points, it's quite easy to watch at the same time. If you've not watched any of David Lynch's movies, I do think this is like the perfect place to start, because it's not quite as batshit insane as something like Eraserhead or Mulholland Drive, but it's also not quite as normal and straightforward as like The Straight Story or Elephant Man. This is in my top 20 of all time, to be honest, so yeah, 10 out of 10. Starting on the 2nd, I watched a few films for episode 16 of the Sunday Movie Marathon, my podcast I do. The first film I watched for it was Blade Runner. After finishing Blade Runner, I actually went straight into watching all the short films and stuff they made leading up to 2049, and then I rewatched 2049. I'd only watched it once a couple of years ago and I really loved it at the time, so I was happy to see not only it held up, this is probably on par of the original. It's kind of hard to compare the two together because they are so vastly different. They're basically two completely different movies. Both Blade Runner movies are incredible. I give them both 10 out of 10s, and the short films were pretty decent also, even if I wasn't a huge fan of them. On the 3rd, I rewatched E.T., and on the 4th, I rewatched Waves. All of those films you can hear me talk about, apart from 2049, on episode 16 of the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all of those stuff. On the 5th, I watched a documentary film, American Movie. This is one of the strangest documentaries I've ever watched. Watching it is like kind of hard to believe that what you're actually watching is real. Like, it genuinely at points feels like just like a mockumentary. All of the people in the film feel like written characters. They're so weird and hilarious, and there's like a lot of moments where they have like great unintentional comedic timing. Like, I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the film was staged just because of how well timed a lot of it is. But it's a really warm, heartfelt and passionate movie that I enjoyed a lot. I watched the film having a few drinks, and I think that may have ruined the experience. Maybe I'd enjoy it a lot more if I was sober, but I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. On the 6th, I rewatched The Graduate, and yeah, I absolutely loved this movie. I watched it for the first time a couple years ago and really loved it, so I got the Blu-ray recently and I was super excited to rewatch it. And not only did it hold up incredibly well, I really loved this film and think it might be one of my all-time favorites now. It's super funny, well written, has some incredible performances in there, and it's upsettingly relatable in a way that I think most young people will understand. This film has held up incredibly well, and although I do have an issue with how much that one Simon and Garfunkel song plays, I still think this is pretty much a perfect movie, and I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. On the 8th, I watched Funny Games, directed by Mikhail Haneke. That was also a film I watched for the Sunday Movie Marathon for episode 17, I believe. On the 9th, I rewatched Taxi Driver, directed by Martin Scorsese, and yeah, this is one of the greatest movies ever made, and if you haven't watched it, you're missing out on an all-time classic. It's 10 out of 10 because it's just the perfect movie. I watched 2 other films that day, starting with Repo, the genetic opera for the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast, and it sucked. I have no more words I can say about this movie because I spoke about it in depth on that podcast. But yeah, this film's awful. I also watched Don't Look Now, directed by Nicholas Roeg. This is a very restrained and melancholic movie. It's one of the few horror movies I've ever seen where really nothing actually happens until like the last 15-20 minutes, but all throughout there's like this slow kind of off-putting tone. Like, although most of the film is pretty normal in a way, there's like running underneath it, there's just this weird surreal element, and there's just something strange going on that you can't quite pinpoint, and it definitely gets under your skin and gets into your head. And I think that's probably why it's so beloved by so many people. I feel like it's one that I need to rewatch at some point because I probably like it a lot more then, but I still did enjoy it a lot, and I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Definitely one that I am looking forward to rewatching in the future. From the 10th to the 23rd, I slowly rewatched all of the first half of Phase 3 of the MCU. That of course includes Captain America Civil War, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Thor Ragnarok. So the next MCU video will be out in the next week or so, and then hopefully the last one will be out less than a month later, hopefully, fingers crossed. But I'm probably going to completely jinx myself there and it will never come out, but fingers crossed it will be out around about then. On the 12th, I watched Blue Jasmine, directed by Woody Allen. Woody Allen is a director I am trying to get into a little bit, but I'm also quite hesitant because he's an awful person. I really loved Annie Hall. I hated Midnight in Paris, so I wasn't sure what to expect from this film, and it started off very, very rough, but as it started getting going, I ended up really enjoying it. Cate Blanchett is incredible in the movie and definitely deserved the Oscar she won for it. All the characters in the film are incredibly interesting and entertaining to watch, even though they're incredibly flawed. There were some great performances all throughout, and I just generally enjoyed the movie a lot. I have a lot of issues with it, and like I said, the first 10 minutes or so are awful. But yeah, this was definitely a pretty good movie, and I'm looking forward to checking out some more Woody Allen stuff, I guess. It's kind of more of a thing where I want to do it because I love Annie Hall and because he's like so acclaimed, and less because I want to support him. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. On the 13th, I watched Blood Simple, directed by the Coen brothers. I'd watched about half an hour of this film before and I really wasn't into it for some reason, but I gave it another chance now because I recently got a big box set of Coen brothers movies and I really loved it. It was their first film, and it's interesting going back that far and seeing that even in the early days they had a lot of the tropes and style that you expect from the Coen brothers. It's a very tense film and I love the way that they create this constant feeling of paranoia throughout. The acting is all great, the writing is fantastic, the film is just generally very entertaining, but it's also quite slow in a really good way that makes it really suspenseful and exciting to watch. If you're a fan of the Coen brothers, then I cannot recommend this film enough, and I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. On the 14th, I watched Sound of Metal, directed by Darius Marder. Annoyingly, this isn't out in the UK yet and probably won't be out for quite a while because although in a lot of countries it's being added as an Amazon Prime original, in the UK we're getting it in the cinemas, and obviously cinemas aren't open yet, so we gotta wait till they open. It's annoying because there's a lot of films from late 2020 or 2019 that we haven't got yet because the companies that own them refuse to put them onto streaming services or to be able to buy or rent, so we just have to wait until the cinemas reopen, which is incredibly frustrating. Luckily, like I said, where this one's on Amazon Prime in a lot of countries, I just used a VPN to watch it, and I'm definitely glad I did because this is a really great movie. Riz Ahmed and Olivia Cooke both deliver career best performances in the film. I think Riz Ahmed is pretty much the front runner for the best actor Oscar this year. The sound design is absolutely incredible and honestly some of the best sound design I think I've ever heard in a film. I do really actually want to see this in the cinema after watching it, so I'm looking forward to its theatrical run because the sound is definitely something that I think would work a lot better on a full sound system. This is an incredibly emotionally powerful movie and one that I cannot recommend enough. It's definitely worth the hype it's getting, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. On the 14th, I rewatched What We Do in the Shadows, which is one of the funniest horror comedies ever made. This is probably my favourite Taika Waititi movie, and I just have an absolute blast every time I watch it. I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. On the 15th, I rewatched Airplane for the first time in a few years. When I was like 10 or 11, this was like my favourite film, and I would watch it like at least once a week along with all the Naked Gun movies. So I definitely have a strong nostalgia for this movie, and it really holds up incredibly well. There are a lot of jokes that I remember incredibly vividly because I watched it so many times, but there was also a lot of jokes that I guess I didn't understand when I was younger, or that just completely went over my head that I found a lot funnier now. This is one of the funniest movies ever made, although some of the jokes really have aged very badly. There are some moments that are just so unnecessary. Like there's a scene where a random topless woman runs across the screen, and it's like, what's the point in that? It's not funny, it's just incredibly forced. But apart from that, this film has aged incredibly well and is still absolutely hilarious, and I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. On the 19th, I rewatched Airplane 2, the sequel, and this was not a good movie. I remember really enjoying it when I first watched it as a kid, but rewatching it now, it really does not hold up in the slightest. It's just, it suffers from the really bad sequel formula where they just try and do the same thing as the original without understanding what made that original so good. I have a lot of thoughts on this movie, and I am actually writing a video about it, so hopefully that will be out soon if I decide to actually finish it. But yeah, this is not a good movie at all, and I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 10. On the 21st, I watched David Lynch's version of Dune for the first time. As I've said many times, I love David Lynch, and this was the only movie I'd never seen by him, and Jesus Christ. The majority of this movie was just boring. Like, there was just very little happening that I really cared with, and it was just super dull and uninteresting. But there are actually some sections I did really enjoy, some like genuinely really interesting moments, and other moments that were just absolutely hilarious because it was just so ridiculously cheesy. I cannot wait for Denis Villeneuve's version of this story because I can't imagine it will be any worse than this. I am definitely interested in reading the book at some point because watching this film, I know like I didn't get the Dune experience in the slightest. I got just a pale imitator. David Lynch himself hates the movie because of how much the studios controlled him and pressured him to make changes, and you can definitely tell this film's just an absolute mess. I'm gonna give this one a 3 out of 10. Over the next few days, I watched some films for episode 19 of the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast. Those films were Mulholland Drive, Arrival, and Braveheart. You can watch all of those reviews in that podcast, episode 19. And on the final day of the month, I had a double bill of 2 films that share a lot of similarities in some ways, but are also completely different movies in every single way. The first film being Breaking the Waves by Lars von Trier, and the second film being Punch Drunk Love, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. The similarities in this film are literally just that they're both films about love, and they star Emily Wilson as the female love interest. Apart from that, they're literally 2 completely different films in tone. As you'd expect from Lars von Trier, Breaking the Waves is a very bleak and at times quite depressing movie. It's constantly very disturbing, and there was like a lot of moments where I was constantly like tense and on edge. But also, unlike all of the films I've seen from him, there is actually a lot of heart in this movie. Like, it's genuinely quite a sweet film in this very bitter and dark way. It's incredibly well directed. I love the visual style and how it's all very closely shot and handheld. Emily Wilson delivers one of the best performances of her career, and she's just absolutely astounding in this movie. Stellan Skarsgård is also really great in the film, even if his role is like mostly just confined to him laying in a hospital bed not saying a lot. This is definitely the best Lars von Trier movie I've seen. I've not really been a huge fan of anything else I've seen apart from Dancer in the Dark, but I'm definitely looking forward to checking out the rest of his filmography over hopefully the next couple of years. I don't think I can stomach many of his films in such a short period of time because they're all very emotionally distressing. But yeah, I love this movie and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. And Punch Drunk Love is literally the complete opposite film in every way. This is an incredibly funny, sweet and heartwarming movie. Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favourite directors, and I think this is quite possibly my favourite film of his, which is quite a controversial take, but there's literally nothing I dislike about this movie in any way. I think visually it's absolutely gorgeous, and I love all the little creative like camera movements and editing choices. It actually reminds me a lot of a Wes Anderson film and just how like quirky it is. Adam Sandler is fantastic in this movie, and he proves that in the right performance he is really great, even like as a comedic actor. Like, he's genuinely really funny in this movie. I love John Brian's score as well, and the song that he wrote for the film Here We Go, which I don't think is actually in the film, is like an incredible song that I've just been listening to on loop over the last few weeks. I've always been a huge fan of this movie, but there was something about rewatching it where it just like really clicked for me, and it went from being like one of my favorite films to being like a strong contender for like a top 5 candidate. I really love this movie. It's such an incredible experience. It's just really sweet, heartwarming, and relatable in a lot of ways. If you're looking for something quite weird, quirky, but very sweet, then I highly recommend Punch Drunk Love, and I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. This is a perfect movie. In terms of TV shows, I don't think there was actually anything I completed this month. Along with obviously The Simpsons, which I'm still watching a lot, I pretty much just like have been slowly working on 2 different shows. The first one, of course, being Twin Peaks, which I briefly brought up watching in January, and the other show being Police Squad. It's a comedy TV show from the creators of Airplane and the Naked Gun trilogy, the Naked Gun trilogy actually being a spin-off of the TV series. It's kind of exactly what you'd expect from their style, very stupid but incredibly funny and witty. There's loads of great visual puns. A lot of the best jokes were sadly copied into the Naked Gun trilogy, so there's a lot of jokes that I have already heard and I think are done better in the movie, but this is still a really fun show. It's only 6 episodes and I'm about halfway through, at least, maybe even more. I just haven't got around to finishing the show yet, but that's hopefully something I'm going to be doing early in March, so I'm looking forward to it because it's a really funny show, and I'm definitely glad that I finally got around to watching it after owning the DVD for years. I finished watching Pretend It's a City, the new Martin Scorsese Netflix series with Fran Lebowitz. I'd slowly watched the series over a few weeks and I definitely enjoyed it quite a lot. It's a very funny, interesting and well-made documentary series. Your enjoyment on it really depends on what you think of Fran Lebowitz. I had never really seen her in anything before and like never really heard her speak or anything, so watching it felt pretty fresh for me. I did feel like some of the observations she made were a little bit stale and safe and didn't really feel that unique or anything. I wouldn't say it changes the way I'm gonna look at life or anything, but it made me think a little bit. And that was everything I watched in February. Maybe March will be a little bit more busy, but I'm not sure. The fact that February was definitely a shorter month probably led to the fact that there was less movies, but also I've been working on a lot of stuff, some of which I can't announce yet and will be announcing in the future. But yeah, thanks for watching till the end of this video. I just want to remind people that I do a weekly podcast called The Sunday Movie Marathon with 2 of my friends. If you want to hear me talk to 2 people about movies every week, well, check that podcast out. It's on Spotify, YouTube, everywhere where you can listen to podcasts. And also I just brought back my podcast Deep Diving, in which I take a look at bands' discographies and review every single one of their albums. That podcast is now a Spotify exclusive due to the licensing of the music that we play. So if you want to hear me talk about bands and music that I don't really talk about much on my YouTube channel, go check that podcast out also. It's on Spotify. Just type in Deep Diving and then Chris Holland and it should come up. Thanks for watching this video till the end, and I'll see you next time.